People said you cannot do this here. You know, this is a radical kind of music, and it can't happen in D.C. But once it took root, it grew in ways that we could have never imagined.
Mr. President, Mr. Carter.
If D.C. seems like a town that punk shouldn't happen in, then maybe that's exactly where it should happen. And it did make us want to scream.
And if I ask you why, you'll arrest me. And if I call you lie.
A lot of ideas all came together and broke free from what could have been just a real kind of forward momentum of just rock and roll, and no time for that.
DC really turned it up a notch. And to the people that hated punk rock, hardcore punk rock became even more offensive.
Their value system is radically different from that of most Americans.
Because it's a government place. Every time there was a place that would form a scene, it would be quickly shut down.
We're outnumbered, we're disliked. All we have is our allegiance, this music. And when you have alliances like that stuff's forever.
Certain bands who got really huge referenced the DC punk scene as a core reason why they even existed. And you realize that it's a movement.
Welcome to Songbyrd Music House. And we are here with the filmmakers of Punk the Capital. A great film about an important slice of DC music history that has a strong connection also to Adams Morgan. One of the reasons we are doing this here at Songbyrd is because we're coming up on the 42nd annual Adams Morgan Day, which is happening this Sunday, September 13th. And of course, it's a little different this year, like everything is in our world. Mm-hmm. So there is a focus on some digital, broadcast and entertainment, music, history, culture of our neighborhood, of which this film certainly intersects. And this neighborhood played an important role in this film and the subject of this film. So yeah, I'm here with Paul Bishow and James June Schneider, filmmakers, producers of Punk the Capital. And would you guys mind introducing yourselves and saying a little bit about where this film is at right now and how we got to where we are right now?
Well, Paul Bishow, where's the film at? It's a little bit in the background right now, but it's coming out soon more publicly, I hope.
Yeah, this winter time. So, yeah, and I'm James June Schneider, and a quick shout out to our third member. There's sort of three main people behind this film. Sam Levine, who's not here tonight, but he was another. It wouldn't have happened without his work too on this project. But yeah. Great,
thank you. Yeah, as we were talking about, I was fortunate enough to see the film in a theater at Silver Spring AFI. And that was a great week run that y'all did and had some great Q&As and some great guests. Just as an introduction, can one of you speak to just sort of the driving force or the key elements that brought this film into being, this subject matter in this film?
Well, the subject matter is popular in DC, the whole DC hardcore scene. Basically, James, who I met at screenings that I would hold around town and stuff, he'd come back and we'd watch movies. He realized I had quite a bit of footage, and I guess that inspired him to want to put it together to make something everybody could see all at one time, kind of thing.
Yeah, because no one had done a film about DC punk at that time. So we're talking about the turn of the century here. And I had done some films with DC bands in the 90s, like one with the makeup, and some stuff with other bands like Jawbox and stuff. So at that point, I wasn't looking for a project because they always seemed to find me. But our friendship and all that great footage that Paul had shot back in the day, circa '79, it just seemed like a no-brainer. I happened to be leaving the country around then, so it took a while to get back to it. But we started collecting in the early 2000s. Yeah.
Now, obviously the film is a mix of interviews and a lot of this great footage that you're referring to. Paul and I took a walk down to 2318 18th Street a little while ago, which is a central location as it relates to this film. Can you speak about the actual content and some of the footage that we're referring to and where some of that came from?
Well, that is where it came from, 2318. It was Madam's Organ Art Co-op, who originally started as for art on the walls kind of thing, local artists who wanted to have a place to show a sort of do-it-yourself kind of thing before people even coined the term. And actually, they're sort of the first people I met in this town. And then quite suddenly or something, it seemed they started having shows on weekends to showcase bands that nobody else was letting play. I had no place else to go kind of thing. And it really took off.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this down the street, how you sort of arrived at that place and that scene, and you were in Adams Morgan at the time. I mean, did you consider yourself a punk? I'm curious.
No, I never self-labeled as punk. For one thing, I had long hair, and I never did cut it off for that. But no.
So did the Exploited.
Yeah,
it
right.
Just stood on end.
But I think that's one of the nice things about punks is it doesn't matter what other people call you. You self-identify as punk or not. It's up to you.
Yeah, I mean, well, I will talk a couple points in this, about what I took from the film or maybe what it meant to me as somebody who, has been from around DC and involved in the music scene. But, I mean, before I get to any of that, James, what was your relationship to DC punk scene before this film, let's say?
Well, I grew up in DC, so I was brought up kind of at the crossroads between the skateboard scene and the music scene. I mean, it really was a soundtrack of my youth, if you will. From whatever, started going to shows around 13, around the mid 80s. So I missed this first generation of hardcore that we cover in the film. So that's why it was particularly great to dive into this film, because not only was it the period before I was going to shows and living some of this, but it was also before a lot of the other stories that people have already told. So we really wanted to dig back in time and kind of uncover some new material.
Yeah. So I mean, it's like you say, well, a project found you, but you do have, a connection to this music and to this this story, if you will.
Yeah, definitely. And Madam's Organ in particular was a huge discovery for me. At one point, I said to Paul, I was like, we really just should make a film just about that, because I felt like it could have been the whole thing. But in fact, should we watch an excerpt of Madam's Organ?
Yeah, let's do that.
You realized, these are my people. What a bunch of weirdos. And then you go, aha, I'm a weird person. Madam's Organ was a house full of people like that. And that was so impactful to finally have a place I belonged.
And the Bad Brains actually lived in the house for a while and practiced in the basement, and songs like Band in DC were written right there in the basement. And when I was putting up the posters, it wasn't just like, oh, I'm gonna hang these things and see what happens. It was just like the right time, and this was gonna be a big thing that was gonna blossom right in front of our eyes.
You're no longer a spectator. Music becomes a real part of your life. And you watch this chapter of music history get written.
That's Henry Rollins and
Russell Brain.
Russell Brain.
Brain, yes.
Speaking a little bit about Madam's Organ, 2318 18th Street Northwest. Madam's Organ is an important word or phrase in this community, in Adams Morgan. And there's a story in this film that is maybe another side of the coin that some people don't know about that story. Maybe one of you can speak about, the film is very educational in that sense. And if someone, would want to summarize sort of the backstory of the original Madam's Organ.
Paul, do you want to?
Well, James actually tracked down the woman who named it, S.D.
Cantor.
Cantor, who, at any rate, became a minister of some sort. And she was one of the artists that they were looking for a space, and she called a friend, and he just mispronounced the name, and she said, "Wow, that's great." And then they decided to use it. And again, it has no commercial potential.
Well, it's still an establishment. There is an establishment called Adams Organ here in Adams Morgan.
I don't know where he got that name. I don't know.
Well,
it's not related.
It existed, and it's just an interesting Adams Morgan story, how the brand of Madam's Organ has grown and shifted and still lives in a certain way. And to the extent that that's an entry point to learning more about this story, I think that's important as well.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know whether they're taking pictures of it just because it's an interesting looking building or not, but I do see sometimes people referring to it as the original one. There's some confusion about that lineage, but it's totally unrelated. Yeah.
And just one of the things I was interested in that we were chatting about was kind of where this initial audience was coming from. Who were the sort of original DC punks, and did you observe any ways that they were different than, or maybe similar than, to, punks and the punk scenes that were growing up in other locations as well?
Well, Paul was there at Madam's Organ.
Okay, some of the original punks, like Charlie, they were really just kids. Charlie Davis actually lived at Madam's Organ. He was 13 years old. His father lived there, and they each had rooms there. It was a group house kind of thing, and he would be friends with Alec Mackay, the kids. They were just kids, and Charlie was the one who would bring bands to Russell and say, "Well, let's get this band," or I'm sure Russell found other bands different ways and stuff like that. But then if you do have a few people there, and they would tell their friends, "You got to come see this stuff." And so it was, kids and I guess their high school buddies and stuff. So they were pretty young.
Yeah, it was a youthful movement.
Definitely.
That was and then there was the generation that kind of welcomed them in, the older generation, like Slicky Boys, Black Market Baby, and Slicky Boys already 75, 76, they were starting to play. Bands like Overkill too, but Slicky Boys obviously had the long haul going for them. And True Facts and the Insaniacs, those are the bands that would invite them to open up for them and kind of give them
And some of this overlap with bills that might have played at the Keg previously as well, as I took from the film, another music venue, if you want to call it that, in Upper Northwest. And like you're referring to, there was sort of this overlap or a passing of the torch for a while, because it wasn't like, these were the first people making rock music in DC, but it was a new, youthful movement that was coalescing.
And it was really intergenerational at first. Like what I was fascinated to discover at Madam's Organ was not just the generations, but it was the backgrounds. Like there were working class kids, there were kids from maybe, upper middle class from Georgetown. There was a mix racially. There was more of a mix than there would be a little bit later. So actually, there was even like a promising Afro-punk scene. There were bands like the Enzymes, Bad Brains, and in the audience you can see there's like a lot of mixing going on. And unfortunately, that didn't really last. I saw this kernel of possibility, like in a lot of Paul's footage, like, oh wow, there was like a real thing, but it didn't really evolve that way. But in the end, in the beginning, I mean, it was really mixed, Yeah.
Yeah, and so again, I mean, the film traces rather specifically 1978 to 1983, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And, you know, we've sort of touched on maybe why we picked that beginning date. Can you speak a little bit about on sort of what it meant to, you know, was it Minor Threat kind of going their own separate ways? What felt like the ending point to this origin story?
I don't know about ending. I mean, a break or a chapter.
Yeah.
You know, chapter heading kind of thing. But yeah, I think, you know, by '83 and stuff, it was more commercially viable and stuff than it was before that. I don't think they made a lot of money, but they were being booked into clubs that did have cover charges and did, you know, pay the bands and stuff like that.
Yeah, it was an evolution, perhaps.
Yeah.
It's also around, well, we did wind up focusing on primarily three bands, Slicky Boys, Bad Brains, and Minor Threat, kind of like as representative of sort of the early evolution. So it's true that the end of Minor Threat kind of gives a good ending point, and also it's right on the cusp of what became known as Revolution Summer. So, and we don't actually go into it. We just kind of end on that energy, that sort of this point of becoming, where things are about to go somewhere, and we can, you know, kind of take that with us on our way out of the movie.
Now, again, as a venue owner, and I look at this film, and I really try to put myself, and your film helps me put myself in the place. You know, first talking about the Keg as a venue, then focusing on Madam's Oregon, and then touching on the early days of 930 Club, which played maybe an important role in going into that next chapter that you're referring to. But yeah, I do try to put myself in that place, and I say, what, you know, did some of these bands, and it may have been mixed, did they want to play more proper venues, or what did they, you know, the DIY ethos of playing at Madam's Oregon, what did you sense from the film, and what you saw was the tension between, you know, playing in venues versus, you know, cultivating this more, you know, free DIY type of situation?
I'd definitely say they were still doing the DIY thing. There was, it's not really in the movie, but there were, with the closure of Madam's Oregon and the few places like 930 Club opening up and stuff, there were attempts at, there were a lot of bars, the Chamber or the Hung Jury, which would, you know, in DC be a big lunch crowd. DC Space, they had a big lunch crowd, and at night DC Space would have dinner theater, all kinds of stuff. And eventually they start showing, they were showcasing, you know, True Facts and the Insaniacs, and they would have punk shows, and they would have, you know, but even the famous Unheard festival, which they sort of just paid to four wallet. They just said, you know, we want to rent this space out, and they'd do an afternoon show there, stuff like that. So they were still, but it was sort of an explosion, and it was just everywhere, and you couldn't really even keep track of it.
Yeah, so the Unheard Music Festival, which happened in, I guess it was, winter, December, November 1980, at DC Space, was kind of the continuity of Madam's Oregon, of that energy. It was another effort to kind of mix the generations, kind of like the last time. We actually have a clip from that, if you'd like to see it.
Yeah, let's check that out.
The Atlantis Club would not book people that were not of drinking age, but it was the only game in town. And they didn't really want weird people playing there. And the DC Baltimore area is rife with weird bands.
We're all slaves, rock and roll.
The nurses decided that we were going to put on a show of all the people who couldn't play in DC. That's what we're going to do.
That was really when people thought, oh, something really creative and new is happening.
Focus is up here. That's a zoom.
I found something that I wrote in December of 1980. The local scene is really picking up. The Unheard Music Festival was great. All the good bands played. Henry's new band, Ian and Jeff's new band, and a band called GI. The music's really getting fast and short, and I danced so hard I still have bruises all over me. I just love living in DC.
In the first show that GI ever did, at the Unheard Music Festival, I was just so super nervous, and I was like looking like I just got shocked by like an electric shock, and I was like,
just a great range of bands. I mean, it was a cool mix of new wave bands and early hardcore bands.
The original flyer, it actually says Ian's band on it. Didn't even have the name Minor Threat when I made up the flyer.
At that point in time, there was, and this applies to Madam's Organ as well, there was more diversity because everyone involved was kind of weird, you know.
It worked, and I don't know why now. I mean, back then it seemed normal. Okay, you know, oh, Keen Island's going to go on, Billy Hancock's going to go on, okay.
Yeah, so that was a bit there about the Unheard Fest that you were speaking about. This was sort of going on concurrently with what was happening at Madam's Organ, it sounds like?
No, it was...
a little bit after?
Yeah, so Madam's Organ, what was it, in the spring of 1980 that they were evicted?
I'm not good with the dates. But I guess that is about right.
And then this was in the fall of 1980.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Or
and
winter.
they did, you know, through the summer and stuff. They started booking places like the the name of the school,
Not the Wilson Center.
yeah, Wilson Center. and
Wilson
stuff like
Center.
that.
Was it that year already?
I don't know. It might have been a little after that, but that was when HR was talking about raising money for a new venue and stuff. And Wilson Center turned out to be a really good one. They, you know, there was some nominal charge, and then they would pretty much let them do anything they want. They didn't sell any alcohol or anything
Right.
like that. So
Actually, that was an interesting tidbit from the film about mention of some efforts to raise money to continue a DIY space like Madam's Organ, and then it sort of, well, we don't know where some of that money went. It paid somebody's rent. Maybe it paid the last month of rent at the Madam's Organ. You know, I don't know if there was any other nuggets that got left out of the film about anything there, or where else they may have looked to establish a DIY space, or if it just went in these other directions at that point.
I think HR was really, right? HR was really behind the effort to find a new space at the time, right, Paul?
yes, but without the funds raised, I don't know. You know, but he did. Wilson Center was, I think, one of the first places they went to. But there were other places that tried to jump in. Space 2 Arcade, very obscure little places downtown.
But maybe it is important that by this time, at least an audience had been proven, so at least somebody with a space can say to themselves, well, you know, I don't know how I feel about this music or these people, but there's something here that's gonna happen, so, you know, we've proven that the people will come at least.
Yes.
Yeah.
That comes through. from the story. So yeah, I've enjoyed watching it twice. I enjoyed seeing it in the theater as well as then kind of quietly where I could listen to and watch the little nuances and different things like
And
that.
I love archives too. I mean, I love setting archives into motion and kind of seeing how to pull out sort of the essence of them, if you will. I love to have them come alive,
Yeah, and that occurred with the old film as well as the stills and different things.
Oh dear. It's HR.
Is it?
HR? HR's on the phone?
That's on, yeah.
HR performed here on his new stuff.
Hello? I missed it. Oh well.
So, I appreciate you guys doing this as part of, our programming for Adams Morgan Day. Of course, like we talked about, definitely an intersection with Adams Morgan and DC music, and then of course a music that really kind of went nationwide and worldwide, and that DC was an important part of that, kind of worldwide conversation happening around this music and this youth movement that, as I observed earlier, seemed to be taking shape in different forms around the world as a sort of a political thing and a counter to things that had been happening earlier, and DC played an important role in that. We were talking before, but I'm curious if you can just speak about what kind of is happening next with the film, how you might be rolling it out or plans for the rest of the year and beyond.
Paul, you want to start, or?
I don't know. I miss movie theaters probably more than you could realize, but I don't know that can happen anymore. But hopefully we'll get the movie out to be able to sit at home and watch it.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, so probably definitely this winter we're planning a release both on streaming and a DVD. We're going to do a double DVD with a whole boatload of bonus material. We do have an excess of material, of footage and stuff that wasn't in the film or that we'd like to elaborate on.
Yeah, well, I mean, do let us here in Adams Morgan and in DC, know how we can help and continue to participate in that. I mean, like at the very least, we want to make sure everybody in DC and the region is aware of this and sees the important work that's done. I might wrap up on this note. I know I sent you this ahead of time, and maybe I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, and I'm happy to ask myself the same question. But what you took from your work, or I can speak from what I took as a, viewing the film, what do you think came across as like the ethos or the or the contribution to the conversation that DC punk and DC hardcore from that period made? And if you need a minute to think of, to kind of digest that, because I think about what do us as viewers take, what can we be proud of, and what can we say was our DC contribution to the music conversation here?
Well, can I start, Paul? You want me to start?
Well, I'd say that they were generally very supportive of each other. I'm sure there are exceptions, but in general, they were indeed. They thought of themselves as family, and they really kind of pulled each other along, right?
That's important. And it was also just a very affirmative scene. I think so. Beyond the music, which is pretty excellent, Bad Brains, Minor Threat, really, for the size of the scene, it's pretty impressive how much influence those two bands alone swayed. But if you look at also just beyond the music, there's sort of this way of approaching, I think, culture. It's sort of this materialist way of doing it where you really are drawing from your proper soil and you're trying to make something that's sort of true to itself and that's not artifice, if you will. I think there was a lot of like, some people call it sincerity. Some people call it, I don't know, you can call it being authentic, all that kind of
Yeah.
approach. But it was really, DC, I think, really at least held that back then and really influenced a lot of people, both in act and in word.
Yeah, I agree, and that's what I take from it as a viewer, that there was a group of people, you know, really striving to express themselves and express something different and express something real in this, you know, in this place that we call Washington, D.C., which in many ways may bear a lot of similarities and, of course, many differences to what it did back then, but I imagine it's equally difficult to create something like this. You know, to think about whether a scene like this could happen now in DC is a whole other question. But they certainly faced their difficulties and challenges as well that were just met with the sheer will to kind of, like I said, do something that was theirs and that was different and unique and sort of an answer, a counterpoint to whatever else that they saw around them.
It had to happen.
Yeah. So, anything else you guys want to say right now about the film? Give you the chance to.
Well, I think we've covered a fair amount of ground. No, we're just really excited to get it out to a broader audience, and this is awesome to be able to have this opportunity to talk here. I mean, this is a great new venue in Adams Morgan, so we're, well, not so new, but relatively.
Yeah, relatively, for sure.
Yeah.
No, thank you for doing it, and I know representing both Songbyrd but Adams Morgan Day, the chance to hopefully continue to get people just aware of that history is a challenge that I always undertake because it matters to me, and I think ultimately it matters to a lot of people if you just catch their attention for a minute.
Yeah.
So, you know, like what you guys did with the screenings at AFI was really important, and I hope you can get back to doing more of that if you choose to, but also around, you know, the streaming and other distribution. I think we will continue to find that, and I hope that we can help. So I thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for spending a little time with us.
Thanks,
and for
Joe.
Adams Morgan Day. And for those watching this on Sunday, I hope you're having a great Adams Morgan Day. And you can follow the film where?
At dcpunkrockdoc.info, or you just search up Punk the Capital on Facebook or Instagram.
Yeah, there's an Instagram handle as well.
Yeah, so we're findable.
And at Adams Morgan Day on Instagram, at Songbyrd DC. And thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Talk to you later.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Brass knob was the last hold on to the knob there.
Building out back that had a hardwood, that was brass knob for a while on the alley.
Oh, Brass Knob was in a different place?
Yeah, there used to be the
Yeah, so we're inside the 2318 18th Street Northwest. So the space that we're in, what was this space?
Well, this was the Madams Organ Art Co-op. And at the time that we're particularly talking about, they had opened their space up. It was fairly good size. It was this size, but there weren't so many walls. There were no walls there. And
it's the cookie shop now.
Yeah, and there were no steps, but there was a stage right here.
So when we see in the film, when we see the bands playing, it was over here.
The drummer would be, of course, right in this spot. And the stage did come out a little bit.
That's crazy.
The stage was about as high. Well, the stage was high enough for a milk carton with cords to fit underneath. So that gives you an idea. It wasn't very high, but of course, well, that's a drop ceiling. But of course, you know. So this was actually it. It was pretty small.
Was that still the entrance? I mean,
No, that was not it. There was no door there. There was a wall that went straight back, and just a few feet, and came in right there.
Like kind of in the back over there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, as the shows went on Sundays they used to clean up and actually tear down walls just to make more room. So all the...
So these walls were here, so it was more open.
It was open all the way to the kitchen.
How many people would cram in
well,
here?
you know, 80, 120. 120 would be really, really packed.
So I mean, Bad Brains played shows here.
They did indeed.
There's footage, your footage, right?
Yeah.
I mean, by the time, I don't know, you know, if we're talking about 79, 80, kind of in that earlier phase, like, they were known by then. In the city anyway, yeah?
I would say yes. It's complicated because when you're on the inside, you don't know exactly what the outside is thinking. Sure. So yes, they were definitely known by us.
Right.
You know, and there was actually a lot of people. And okay, say people, you know, would come in the snow and the rain and whatever and see that.
I mean, were there situations where it was like where there was something big enough happening that it was like, you know, it got to be, I mean, some of the footage in this film is
it got very
pretty
crowded,
situation.
but I don't think it got to the point where we were turning people away.
Right.
I mean, because they were letting people in anyway. And indeed, the police used to come every night, and they didn't even shut it down. They would say, do something, do this, or do that, and we'd say, oh, okay. One of the things was you can't hang out on the stoop. Although it didn't really matter, because there wasn't much going on out there and stuff like that. And we'd say, okay. You know.
And you mentioned, because it was the Madam's Organ Art Collective.
Yeah.
Is that what they called it? Something like that?
Yeah.
So they had kind of opened up their space to these DIY punk bands and the fans and the people related to the scene.
Yes.
And like one of the things that comes through in the film a lot too is that it was, you know, there was a freedom provided in that sense, that it was a DIY. So I mean, people were coming, these weren't ticketed shows per se.
True, there were no tickets, but there was
a sort of a donation collection of money.
You know, it was $3, I think, was the most it ever went up to.
Right.
And,
because there's like one part of the film where they talk about, you know, maybe someone like Bad Brains, they might walk out of here with a few $100s one night.
Yeah, the only time I can actually remember myself going into the counting room kind of thing was DOA played, because they had a manager with them.
Okay.
And then indeed they laid out all the money and counted it.
Yeah.
Like you say, it was like $300.
Right.
But, you know, again, that was sort of a nice thing about it. It was nobody. I mean, they would have liked to got paid, but they didn't. You know, it wasn't. They weren't doing it for the money. That's pretty clear.
Right. It wasn't like this proper venue promotion. You know, this sort of more formalized, you know, system that we sometimes work on now. It was much more free and word of mouth and different things.
You know, word of mouth. Well, and posters on you know, on lampposts and stuff. But obviously, it's pre-internet. Nobody ever.
Sure.
You know, advertising was indeed strictly posters, Xerox posters at that.
Do you feel that the space was for some period of time, was the space well cared for by like the art collective, or was, you know, did it take its beating because of the types of things that were going on in here? What's your sense of that?
Yes, when it was mainly wall art, pictures, photography. I mean, upstairs there was a dark room. There was all kinds of stuff. Now, this is kind of odd because for me, the collective was here.
Yeah.
And I get mixed up about my own life sometimes, the order things happen. But when I first moved to DC, I lived down on 14th and Ann.
Yeah.
And for some reason, while exploring the city and stuff, one day coming back from the zoo and walking down, this is the first time I'd been in the neighborhood. And I said, well, that's interesting and stuff. And then I think I got a job at a print shop as a proofreader. I was terrible at it. But I used to walk home or ride my bike home up 18th Street. And I kind of met these people just hanging out on the stoop and stuff. And then they said, well, come on over. You know, because I told them I make movies and I do this. And they said, well, come on over. And I came over. And then after that, it was pretty much the first friends in this town I made.
And now it's a cookie store, Insomnia Cookies, and Wash Hydro below us. I'm not sure what's upstairs. I guess some
I think there's some Something about passports for foreigners or something upstairs. I don't know exactly.
I guess some cannabis and cookies would have come in handy back in the late 70s.
Well, there was plenty of both.
A little DIY on that too, probably.
Yeah, no, I'll tell you. I had a friend of mine come to visit from further down south, and we brought him over here and stuff, and they had a lottery. They used to have a bar downstairs, and they had a bar in the kitchen. And it wasn't really like a bar, it was just beer. And it was Wiedemann's beer. It was very cheap beer, and they'd sell for $1 a bottle and stuff. But downstairs, they had a little, like, wine glass full of joints, and it was $1 a joint. Okay. And then they had a raffle, and you took a chance on the raffle, and they'd raffle off a nickel bag. Right. Totally illegal. But my friend won it the first time he was here, and he was like, "Oh, this is great."
Initiative 71 compliant, the raffle. All right. Well, is there any particular, I've seen your film twice now, and the footage is obviously an important part of the film, and it's really cool. Any particular memories or cadre of memories that kind of stick out in the space? Like, did you have a favorite spot that you sort of like to watch shows in?
Well,
or any?
It's pretty small.
Yeah.
As it is.
Getting where you fit in.
No. It's huge. Actually, some people tell me chronologically it's only 9 months, but it seems much longer than that to me. But so actually there was I filmed a lot, and then during other days and stuff I was actually making a movie and we were using it as a set kind of deal and stuff like that. But also there were times when I said I really want to go to the show tonight, but if I bring my camera I can't get involved or something.
Right.
And so there are many days where I consciously left the camera home just so I could be in it.
Right.
So there's that part too.
But we are left with some good times that you were here with the camera.
Yeah.
Because I guess part of your thing was making movies. I know you've made several. I don't even know the full filmography that you've done, but I know you've been involved in the documentary filmmaking and other things. So. Well, maybe you're one of these guys like Antonio, where the camera was like a fixture for you.
Yes, that's just true. You have you're always looking through the camera. Yeah. And it's definitely a remove. It makes you, and while Madam's working, so I was making a movie called Wet Streets at Night, which is fictional. But I was making a movie that was sort of like a sociology of punk. Okay. Kind of tongue-in-cheek at the same time it was actually going on. It was a kind of a strange idea. We made up a band. I had people.
Oh, cool.
Pretending to be in a band. That eventually some people thought was a band.
That's like ahead of its time. Like that's something people would do now. It's like Nasty Cherry. You know what I'm talking about? The show they made. Anyway, it's down the rabbit hole. Well, cool, man. I just wanted to get us here for a minute. It's a historic space that nobody really knows about.